Are you guys doing okay?
Morning. Yep.
How y'all doing? Okay, let's see who we have on the call today. We have a few people missing, but it's okay, I guess. Um, so today we go on to start chapter 6, which is implementing virtualization with Hyper-V. Let's see if I can record this one. Um, and basically, this is it's not new trends anymore. Okay, it was a new trends in maybe 2012 or so, long time ago, like 10 years ago. You go to a data center and you see a lot of computers, a lot of servers on racks, and it takes a lot of spaces, takes a lot of power. So somebody said, well, this is need to be stopped or need to do something to save space and energy. Plus, the most important part why we have to go to virtualization is what? To make high availability. Because somebody said, okay, we're gonna make or emulate the physical machine into like a software base, and that's how the industry start. Now, if you ask somebody, okay, how do you virtualize? I mean, this is like a stupid question, but if you ask that question 10 years ago, and they give you a different answer than today. It's not what if you have virtualization or not, is what you need, what server you don't need to virtualize, because most of the servers now are virtualized, with the exception with some applications that are hardware intense, and that's maybe you need to have it on a physical machine. But most of the technology today is virtualized. So, and that's what we need to talk about today. So, in order to virtualize, you need to have the ingredients or the components to virtualize. And one of them is you need some kind of software. That's what we're going to talk about. So the Hyper-V server role, that's the software that enable you to virtualize, to create a virtual machines. After you create the virtual machine, you need to be able to manage and configure the virtual machines. So that's basically the objective of the chapter. Any question at this point? No question. Okay. Now you're gonna hear a lot, or you're gonna see a lot of virtual terminology when it comes to that. For example, a virtual machine. Well, somebody said, "Okay, what is a virtual machine?" So, virtual machine basically emulate a physical machine. Like in the physical machine, we have memory. Virtual machine has memory. The physical machine, for example, has a processor. The virtual machine has a processor. So everything is in the physical machine. We're gonna have it in the virtual machine. It's like an emulation of the physical machine. And actually, now some people, what they do, they take a physical machine and they convert it into a virtual machine or a server. So that's basically what we mean by that. And also, they have um, hardware and BIOS. Okay. Then you have what we call the guest OS, and which is an operating system installed in a VM. In the same way, you install it on any physical machine. Basically, whenever you create a virtual machine, it's going to ask you to install an operating system. And there's a lot of reason why you want to create a virtual machine. We use it create for security purposes. We use it virtual machine for performance, not performance, for high availability. Okay, because virtual machine at the end of the day is a file, and you can transfer that file from one machine to the other machine. And sometimes you can migrate virtual machine from one host to the other host to make it always available for the users. Host computer, basically a physical computer on which a VM run. So you need a host. Host means what? As the word host. And that's the replacement of that 20 or 30 or 40 server used to be on the rack. Now we can replace it with one host. So let me see if I go to that. Let's see. Let's see what's that. Blue is good. So we used to have a lot of machines like this. One server, two, three, four. I mean, I remember on Ordwan on room 200, that's where our data center used to be. We have literally more than 20 server. We have nursing server, we have a DHCP server, we have the Active Directory server, we have DNS, we have all kind of server. So all these servers, now what we do with them? We bought big machine. That's the host. And that host has like blade servers. Like each one of these are blade server. See what I mean? So at the end of the day, and this is like the storage over here. Put two storage. Anyway, this is like racks of hard drives. Okay. And we connect it to this. So the red one replaces all the other ones. So we save in resources, on space, and the most important part on power. Okay. Because if we have a 20 servers and each server read, remember the old one, is each server has two power supplies, like redundancy in the power supply, and each power supply is like I think it's 900 watts or so. So it consumes a lot of power. Plus, when it consumes a lot of power, it generates a lot of heat. Generate a lot of heat, that means you need to keep your cooling up. So I mean, it's a win-win situation when you virtualize. You save on space, you save on power consumption, and the most important part is what? It gives you better availability for your network. So you have basically, you increase uptime. That's the correct word for it. You increase the uptime of your server because imagine you have a virtual server and a virtual server. You can time like to two storage. I mean, each storage has its own redundancy. Then you have another one. Okay. So you can connect to this one too. So, and also you can have also another blade server if you want. First of all, you have redundancy on the blade itself because each one of them is like a server by itself. So imagine you have 8 of them. That's 8 server in one, and you have another host server, 8 one in one, and you can replicate the VMs in between them. So from user perspective, if one server goes down, you're not going to notice any difference, and that's what you increase the uptime or you increase the availability of your server. So that's what we call the host. Host basically is the machine where you install your VMs. That's what we call the host. Now, of course, you need the virtual software. The virtual software is a software that you need to create the virtual machine. Um, and of course, to install a virtual, to have a host and a software that allow you to create virtual machines, you have to have a specific hardware, okay, specific requirement. Like for example, a long time ago, we cannot achieve that because we used to have like 32-bit processor. So in order to create virtual machines, you need a 64-bit processor. And also your processor needs to support it. And the host needs to have a special BIOS, okay? It's supposed to support the virtual machines. And we're gonna talk about that in a few minutes. So, as they say, software for creating and managing VMs and creating the virtual environment in which a guest OS is installed. Yes, OS basically we're talking about is to create the virtual machine. Now, um, here we go. Oh, we talked about this one. Let's go up with this one here so we don't have to get. So, in order to create virtual machine, or you need to have the Hyper-V first. That's the software. Now we have a lot of different software besides Hyper-V, like we mentioned before. We have VMware that Microsoft caught up with them. So now we have what we call Hyper-V. It's a role that you add on your server and to allow you to create and manage basically virtual machines. And that's what we call the hypervisor. Okay. So the hypervisor basically is same thing like in the past when you have a server, what you have, the main server, the main thing on the server was the kernel. What's the kernel? Kernel basically separates the hardware from the operating system. So if any application needs to access the hardware, has to go through the kernel. And now with the hypervisor, it's a little bit different. It's not the application wants to access the hardware. It's basically means is how you schedule or process the the CPU to schedule to access the VMs instead of the hardware. And sometimes they call it a virtual machine monitor, VMM. That's basically to manage and to monitor the virtual machines. You need the hypervisor. Now, according to what we've seen, and I don't know if some of y'all created virtual machine, we have two types. Whenever you create, there are two types of hypervisor. You have type 1 and type 2, um, which is virtual disk consists of files on the host computer that represent virtual machine's hard drive. So you can install, for example, virtual machines on the operating system itself, like Windows 10 and stuff like that. So you can install on that without a separate host. So anyway, so where is the virtual machines gonna reside? So we create every virtual machine associated with a virtual disk. So whenever you create the virtual machine, it's gonna have a virtual disk. What's in a virtual disk? Consists of files on the host computer that represent a virtual machine's hard disk. So also you have the network configuration, which is created a virtualization software and used by VMs for physical and virtual network communication. This is where you create, for example, the virtual switches. You create, for example, a virtual network card. So all of this is part of managing the virtual machines. Now, also the virtual machine has a capability to take snapshot of that virtual machine because, and especially this is good for testing or whenever you do your lab. For example, you're doing some experiment on the lab and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And if something happens, so you always can revert back to that snapshot. It's like a backup. And that's what we call checkpoint. Checkpoint, basically, you can create a snapshot of that VM. If that VM, something happened to it while you're working on it, so you can go back and you can revert back to that VM. Let's say you were installing Active Directory, and during installation, your VM basically messed up. So instead, go in and reinstall, delete the VM, and reinstall it from scratch. You can revert if you have a checkpoint, a certain point, or backup. You can revert to the original setting. This is actually on your lab. They're supposed to do checkpoint on every lab. That's the first thing you need to do before you start your lab. You need to do checkpoint. Now, this is basically how the Hyper-V hypervisor. This is like the host. This is where your hardware, which is host computer hardware. Then you can do this layer here, which is the Hyper-V hypervisor, which is basically separate your VMs from the hardware, and that's why on the regular machines, you need to install drivers for everything you do. Over here, you don't have to. Whenever you create the virtual machines, it, you create a different operating system, and then after you do your operating system, you install your applications. Okay. Now, of course, um, once you create your, for example, your let's see, give you a better picture here. This is, let's say, your hypervisor right here, that your host. Yeah. That's your host right here, for example. This is multiple blades. Okay. And this is your storage right here. You create your virtual machines and you create multiple virtual machines. Now, maybe you can create like Windows 10 right here. And of course, this is your network right here. So let's say you are here on the network. This is Windows 10. Okay, so this is like a management console. You can manage anything you have in virtual machines, on the hypervisor, or the host from a single point. Okay, because once you create this one here, you're not gonna sit over here and manage all that stuff. Usually, this room right here is like maybe 50 degree, 40 degree. Okay, so it's cold. Keep it cold. So but this one here enable you like on one station, you can manage all this network, or you can do it remotely too from any locations. You can manage it. So, and that's why you have the Hyper-V Manager console. And by the way, you can install that on any operating system, Windows 10 and Windows Server, it doesn't matter. Now, whenever you want to install the Hyper-V, um, it has some kind of requirement. I mean, this is the goes on the book or on the slide tells you the minimum, okay, the minimum requirement. Windows Server 2016 Standard or Data Center Edition. Well, yeah, you need a data center because data center will give you more unlimited number of virtual machines. You can install unlimited number of virtual machines. So you need 1.4 gigahertz or faster. 64-bit CPU. That's a must. Like if you have an old machine with 32-bit, it's not gonna cut it. It also needs support virtualization extensions, which is this is part of the processor. Okay. Sometimes you have the right hardware, but it's not enabled. So you have to go to the BIOS and enable them. And that's what they say, a CPU that support data execution prevention, DEP, and second level address translation, SLAT. They call it SLAT. So SLAT is called EPT on the Intel process and MPT on the AMD. So if you run an Intel, you need to make sure the specification they talk about is on the part of the host. If not, you're not going to be able to do Hyper-V, or you cannot make that machine as a host. It doesn't matter if you install Hyper-V or VMware. The specification for hardware is the same. Um, Virtualization support must be turned on in the BIOS, like I mentioned earlier, because sometimes the hardware is supported, but in the BIOS it's not turned on. So you need to go to the BIOS and turn it on. And I have a couple of times we have to go back to the BIOS and enable it. They have a special section in the hardware that you can enable it. Of course, you're not gonna come jump in it and say, "Okay, this is my machine, and I need to make it as a host." It takes a lot of planning to do a host because the first question you need to ask yourself, okay, how many virtual machines am I gonna create or I need? How many virtual servers? What I'm gonna use the servers for? How much each virtual server needs memory? How much each virtual server need space? All these questions you need to ask yourself first. And according to the answer, you need to spec to see what kind of host do you need. So you need to have enough resources to cover what you need. But if you wanna use let's say like you're taking a class now and you want to buy a little server just to practice, you didn't need a lot of resources. So if you have 16 gig of RAM, for example, and if you have like a couple of terabytes on your storage, you'll be okay to create your VMs. But virtualization support must be turned on in the BIOS, like we talked about, and you have enough free disk space to hold the OS you're going to install as a VM. And of course, you need enough RAM to equal the minimum amount required for Windows Server plus the OS to install. So, whenever you calculate your memory, your server needs RAM too, not just the VM. So, you need to calculate that how much memory I need to allocate for the host and how much memory I need to allocate to each VM. And some VMs needs more RAM than the other. So you cannot, like I said, I cannot make a rule that all the VMs I need to allocate like 2 gig or 1 gig. Some VMs need 4 gig. Some VM maybe needs less. Plus, you need to ask yourself, okay, where do I need to use GUI or I'm going to use Core? So usually the machine that you install or to be like a hypervisor is like a Core, because it does not require a lot of hardware, and you can manage it remotely. Okay, any question at this point? I think we talked about some of this stuff before. So how many of y'all created VM so far? Let's say, let me go to chat. So, yes. Um, so how about it? if you have experience how you create a VM, you have Brandon. Anybody else? Just one?
I've made a Windows and a Linux VM a couple times, but that's about it.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do a couple of them this morning. Um, okay, so installing Hyper-V, like before you jump on the Hyper-V, you need to create the role, like I said. The role is just like a Windows, any role. So you can do that by GUI or by PowerShell. Mostly in a professional way, you do it through PowerShell because, like I said, you're gonna install it as a core. Okay. So and also you can automate creating VMs and add in any hardware and assign in memory and hard disk to VM using PowerShell. So you can automate the whole process doing it with the PowerShell. So that's why PowerShell is very important tools. After you install the role, then you can go to the tools. Let me see. Uh, Remote desktop. I have my machine here, my server. Uh, okay, come on, come on. Okay, so this is my hypervisor basically. This is the host. This is my host, and as you can see, see, um, you add the role Hyper-V. I already added, so it's already there. And if you want to manage or create any virtual machine, you can go to the tools right here. And you go to Hyper-V Manager to manage all or to create all your virtual machines. You go over here. Or actually, I think you can do it from the prompt. You can run some command. I forgot what they call it. Vert MGMT, I believe, dot Microsoft Management Center. Yep, you can do it either way. You can go with that command, or you can go to the tools like we're talking about. So far I created one, two, three virtual machines. And anything you need to do, change setting. I'll talk about it in a few minutes. You can go over here. I think I created on this guy here, I created checkpoint for this virtual machine. If anything goes wrong with it while I'm doing an exercise or something, I can always go back and revert to that machine. Okay? So it's good for testing and doing labs and stuff like that. So let's see. And that's basically the page. Again, to get to that point over here, you can do it two ways. You can go over here, server manager, and you can go to tools. From tools, you go to Hyper-V manager, or you can use the command I just showed you. Vert mgmt.msc. Virtual Machine Management dot Microsoft Microsoft Central Management Microsoft Management Software MSM. You remember that we create on the MSC? We created what? Microsoft Console. I'm sorry, Microsoft Console. So there's two ways you can do it. Now, as you can see on this one here, you have a lot of different virtual machine, and over here they tell you the status. But that's to give you, by the way, to get to this screen here, you didn't need a server, okay? You can have a management console like Windows, any workstations, and you can manage the whole thing from here. Okay, so installing Hyper-V role and management. So once you install the Hyper-V role from a server manager, you are promised to install management tools. When you should do, which you should do if you will manage Hyper-V from same server that is running Hyper-V. To install Hyper-V from PowerShell, use okay. So if you don't wanna go to the GUI to install the role of Hyper-V, you can do it from here. Install Windows feature, Hyper-V, include management tools. So that's how you install it from PowerShell. So you don't have to go through the GUI. It's like one line. And actually, and also you can install nested virtual machines. So I can make one of those server I created here, I can make it as a hypervisor right here. Actually, it's the same thing as, let me see. The one we have, we connect to the school. Let's see, what is it? Well, it's not gonna work. Yeah. Connect to SLCC, VPN. I guess takes time. Anyway, so the one I'm connected to it's a virtual server. Oh, okay. And I create from a virtual server a virtual machines. So this is what we call nested virtual machines. So this is a good command to remember or to put in your note. To allow you to create virtual machines right here. So if you will be manage Hyper-V remotely, you can install just the management tools on the management computer using the commandlet install Windows feature remote RSAT Hyper-V tools. So you can but in able to do this, you need to make sure you can connect to it. You will connect to that server that hosting all the virtual machines. So a lot of things in remotely managed remotely. Nobody's gonna put a chair on the data center and sits in there. So everything's done remotely. Um, so how you enable a remote session? You can use this one here. I mean, you can do it from PowerShell. Enable remotely. Let's see. Wow. You have to go. You can go to the. Make sure whenever you launch the PowerShell, you do as an administrator, then you can run any of these commands. You do it on remotely. And that's actually what they're saying here. On a PowerShell prompt from the management computer, type enter PC session, server Hyper-V, or whatever the name of the remote server. So you can, that's the command, that's the name of the server. So they're talking about if both computers are in the same domain, you will not have to enter credentials. But if it's not, you have to put the credential. So that's what they say. If the remote server is not on in a domain or in a different domain, use a commandlet enter PC session server Hyper-V, which is the server name, space, dash credential, and get credential, and you will be prompted for the credential to sign in the remote server. So at this point, I mean, just to make notes, if you're not familiar with PowerShell, it's okay, but you can take those commands and you do the lab, you can do it, or at least you know it's a possibility to do everything remotely. The most important part is the licensing. I think we talked about this one before. So 2016, and they changed the game, like we talked about it. So so if you have Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V, include licensing for virtual instances of Windows 2016 with the standard and data center edition. The standard edition include 2 licenses for virtual machine instances on Windows 16. Now, data center, like we talked about, is unlimited. So if you have a lot of virtual machine you need to create, you need to make sure you get the data center edition. Let's see. Okay, that's an important. Like for example, if somebody virtualized long time ago, like 2018, 2008, and now they want to upgrade their hypervisor or their host to a new technology with 2016 or 19, how are you going to do that? You can run the upgrade, that's okay, but it's always a good idea to do what? Fresh install, then you migrate. You migrate your whatever to the new ones. So over here, they give you some kind of guideline how to upgrade to Hyper-V on Windows Server 2016. If you have VM from Hyper-V running in Windows 12 or 8, you need to upgrade the VM configuration version to take advantage of new features. So the best thing to do in this case, if you don't want to downtime, you can do migration. Migration is always good because you're going to have a fresh installation of the new operating system. Then you migrate whatever you want. So the configuration version of Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V is 8.0. So if the version of the VM is less than that, you will see the upgrade configuration option. To perform the upgrade, click Upgrade Configuration. PowerShell is like one command. Update version, VM name, where VM name is the VM, the name of the virtual machine. So that's cool. Okay. So upgraded to Hyper-V on Windows Server 2016, like you say, what we have here. This is installed. This is the virtual machines right here called install core. If you want to, they have the configuration version 8, which is on the previous slides. You can install core, and you can uh, let me see if we can see it on the other one. Server hypervisor. Let's see. Let's see. See is see we have maybe setting. Let's see. See, I didn't see it on the other one. Uh, so this is the hypervisor, and you get install core. I didn't see it under which part is this. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. It's right here. I didn't see that. Refresh. That setting. That. This is a different one. Let's see. I didn't see it on this one here. Anybody see it? Inspect this. It looks like it was. Let me see. Import virtual machine, edit this, inspect, stop, remote refresh. I'm trying to relate the two. Let's see. It's like I didn't see it. I didn't see it on mine. It looks like I'm blind. So I think you need to install core. That's what you see, but I can't see it. Anybody see it? Let's see. Let's see over here. Virtual machine manager. Finish space. Stop. Server refresh. Review. I'm gonna look it up and see. I'm gonna look it up. I'll let you know. Okay. So create a virtual machine in Hyper-V. You have you need to go to Hyper-V Manager, and you can see all the tasks related to manage or created is on that management tool, Hyper-V Management. So Hyper-V VMs consist of these files stored in Hyper-V server, configuration file, and a virtual disk. So it's a good idea before you start creating VMs to create a folder or to allocate space where you're going to install all your VMs. Some people they leave it as a default, which is not a good idea. It's a good idea to have specific space where you want to install it, because this way you can create a multiple folders, and for a reason why, because sometimes you need to migrate. Let's say I can make a folder for 601G, that's for that classroom, and I put all my VMs in that folder, and I create another folder for different classroom. I put all the VMs in there. So when it comes to migrate classroom to different place, it will be a lot easier for me to identify what virtual machines I need to migrate or I need to replicate and so on. So it's all part of planning. So whenever, like they said, Hyper-V VMs consist of these files stored on Hyper-V server, configuration file for the VM, and the virtual hard disk files. So in my case here, let's see where we put the VMs. I put them on a VMs is on G. It's a separate folder than the operating system. So if you go right here on disk management, so that's G. It's a separate disk even. It's not on the same disk as the operating system. And I put them on G. I create a folder over here, and we call it what? The VMs. This is where we store all the VMs. So a lot If I want to migrate that all the VMs I create to a different storage, I can do that. So it's a lot easier than going to search where is my VMs on C drive, D drives, whatever. So it's a good idea to have it on one spot. Let's see. So, in addition, you might also find the following types of files associated with the VM, differencing or checkpoint files. And this is related when you say differencing, this is basically because sometimes you will have a parent files in child files. So that's what the part of it. And the save states files. A checkpoint is like a snapshot of the parent VM. The snapshot, you might have a different snapshot for the same VM. And that snapshot, they use the same VHDX or VHD file type, but you might have a different state or version of that snapshot. What's a snapshot? It's a copy of the VM at a particular time. Okay. Okay, so this is important. The process create VM, start a new virtual machine, da da da. Instead of talking about this one here, I'm gonna show you how to install it in here. So to save time. So what we're gonna do is we need to go to over here and I can create a virtual machines right here. Okay, give me a second here. The first thing, whenever you do for labs, for example, you need to make sure you have your tools with you because anything you need to do, you need a tool, right? So what tools do I need? Make sure you have the Hyper-V host. And after that, you need what? You need the iOS. And you can create any OS, like even Linux on the Hyper-V now. Like Red Hats or whatever version of Linux you can do. So this is the VMs. This is the hypervisor with all the VMs located. So if you want to create a new virtual machine, you go over here, and you right click, and you can see new virtual machine. It's like a wizard. You follow the wizard. Or you can automate the process by doing PowerShell. You can do a PowerShell. So um, you can go virtual machines. That's the wizard. You go next. And the first thing they ask you, okay, what is the name of the virtual machines? So you have to give it a name, a descriptive name. So I don't know. Let's see. I need to create the DHCP server. DHCP VM, or you can call it DHCP. That's fine. To save. Now the next one, it tells you where you want to store it. Let's say I don't select this. I go next. It's gonna default it somewhere, but it's good to make sure I need to install it on the designated folder right here, VMs folder. And then you go next. Now, this is where you need to make a good decision between generation 1 and generation 2. So it's a big difference between the two. The generation 1 is like you installing old Windows 7 or whatever version. It has an old BIOS. Like support, for example, let me see, hold on a second. I think we have well, it has an old BIOS, or you need an operating system that will support 32-bit. Okay. I know somebody said, okay, why we need generation one old machine instead that support that has old technology, not the new ones. What's the answer for that? What do you think? Why give me a reason why you need to install generation one. What do you think? Somebody? What's the reason to install generation one? The generation one basically to support, it's a legacy generation. It has an old BIOS, for example, has an IDE, and all that stuff. So what's the reason we need to install that?
Older equipment.
What is it?
You got older equipment in your network, like older computers and older servers, or older,
Well, to start up with, why we need the computers? To install what? We need computers to install software. So if I have, for example, an application, old application, it runs only on old 32-bit, or I need an old operating system, then I need to go to generation one, okay? Because after that, the reason why we installing machines or buying computers is basically to install some kind of software on it, okay? So to run some kind of an application. So if that's the case, then yes, because on the generation one, this virtual machine generation support 32-bit and 64-bit guest operating system and provides virtual hardware which has been available in all previous version of Hyper-V. It's an old technology. And all in the new version, generation 2, for example, they support new technology. This one, for example, they support UFI. This is like an old BIOS, which is MBR, which is not secure. Okay, this is more secure. This one has an IDE. This one has SCSI. And we know by having generation 2, we can do hot swap, and then have to turn the machine down to add RAM or add hard drive or a controller. Okay, so you can do it on while it's running. And this one is an old one. So let's go with generation 2, this case, and you go next. And this is where, for example, you need to allocate the memory and use basically startup memory is a 1024. Now, you need to make a decision on this one here based on what kind of a virtual machine you're installing. What is the purpose of that virtual machine? So if this is going to act like a server and need more RAM to start up, like for example, this is a, if I want to do this one, a GUI or a core, if it's a core to boot up, at least it needs less memory. If it's a GUI to boot up, it needs more memory. So let's say this is a GUI, so put 2048. Now you have an options here to use dynamic memory for this virtual machine. Dynamic memory basically, that virtual machine is going to take the necessarily memory they want. Okay. So what if you click on this one here, and you go next, or I can add the dynamic memory later if I want to. That's an options. Now, if you put a dynamic, if you don't put dynamic memory, that means we're going to allocate 2 gig for that virtual machine, regardless if I'm using that virtual machine or not. If that virtual machine is idle, basically I am taking away 2 gig out of the memory on the host. So nobody can use those 2 gig. But if I'm using dynamic memory and this virtual machine is idle, it's not in operations, I can allocate this memory to some other virtual machines that need it. You follow? So that's the advantage of it. So at the end of the day, we can share the resources. So if somebody's not using that resources, we're going to give that resources to somebody else who needs it. Now, this one, you can configure it now or you can configure it later. So if it's now, I have it already to install it in the switch over here. Over here, they say I have a virtual switch, which is gigabit. Let's see if that works. I don't know, I never tried it, but let's see. Now, this one's going to ask you for the amount of storage you need. So, again, depends what's the use for this one here. What's the main purpose for this virtual machine? So, by default, it's going to allocate 127 gig. So, I can do it for, let's say, maybe 60. Now, I ask you where you want to install this virtual disk. You can say on the existing virtual disk right here, use the existing, or it's going to be in, which is the same thing. It's the same path. Is this one a VMs folder and DHCP virtual? So it's going to be the virtual disk is going to be under that VMs right here. So that's good. Or you can attach that virtual disk for later. So you can attach it. So go next. Now, because this is the new generation, this is generation 2. Generation 1 usually have you can put the operating system in the physical CD-ROM drive or DVD. Now in generation 2 you don't have that option. So basically what you do, you need to point it to where you have that ISO, where you have that image. So in my case, I have it all the image on the ISO folder right here. So I can go over here to ISO and you can browse what operating system I have, because on that particular folder, I have a multiple ISO, multiple operating system. So if I browse right here, I have 2016 and I have 2019. I can select which operating system I want. Let's say with 2019, then you go next and finish. Let's see. So now I am done with the DHCP server. So I can start it to install the operating system. Let's see. Now it's going to install it. Now, of course, over here, you can select whatever you want. You go next, install. Also, I can do this one like this one here, or I can automate it by creating a PowerShell. Over here, you get an options, which one you want to use. I can use data center, I can use core. I always defaulted to core, so we're gonna go with data center. You go next. Of course, you need to check this one here. This is like the licenses agreement. If you don't check it, Microsoft will tell you you cannot use my software, so you have to. At this point, you do custom because the new one. Now, if you have a larger hard disk, you can new partition or you can use the existing one. So we need to use the existing one. So go next. Now, of course, if you install it and on a physical machine, you have to load the driver for the controller. But since this is a VM, you don't have to worry about it. So this is going to take a few seconds. What's the other way to do it? Let's see. Let's see over here. Well, uh, while the other one's running, I can automate this one here. I'm going to give you power, few things in here to do. For example, you can, how much time we have? Let's see. I can, let's see. Let's see what this is. Pound, pound. Create, create a new VM generation 2. You say new dash VM. Of course, you need to give it a name. Okay. Then what you gonna name it? We're gonna name it. I can call it DNS. VM. And you can say how much memory you want. You say memory startup bytes. You see that? And you need to be how much RAM you want. For example, 2 gigabyte. Then you need to say where is that. Look, where are you gonna store it? You can say new VHD path. I think we did that G. Is that G folder? G colon slash VMs folder. See that? VMs folder. That's what I want to do it. Okay. And what's the name? It's going to be the VM names slash. We need to call it, let's see. We call it, what are we going to call it? We need to call it DNS, VM dot what? Dot VHDX. I think so. Yep. Then we need to put the new hard drive, new VHD size, which is correct. How many gigabytes we need to give it? Let's say 60. Oh, we have to put the So we're gonna put 60. We have to use the gigabyte. And what type of machine you need to use? Generation? What generation? Generation 2. Okay. That's cool. So now also you need to see what is that ISO located. So this is, you can specify what ISO you want to use. I can use, you need to add, for example, a SCSI. You can put add VM, add the VM SCSI controller. That's right. VM SCSI controller. Um, VM name space, we call it what? DNS NS dash VM. Okay. Okay, then if you want, you can add the drive where it is located. Okay, so you add, for example, how much time we have? Messed up my. See. So I can put on the next one, we can put add drive SCSI. Add to add a DVD. And the reason I'm doing that, add the DVD drive to mount the ISO to that drive. To drive to SCSI. The SCSI controller that I created. SCSI controller. Okay. And that's basically what I'm trying to do. So how you do that? You do add VM DVD drive. This is right here. Then you need to say VM name. And I'm going to use it to DNS on VM. And we need to call it controller number 1. Because we have controller 0, this is 1 minus controller location 0 minus path. Where is the location for the VM, the ISO, which is G in my case, is going to be slash ISO slash this Windows server right here. Okay. So So basically what I did, I mounted another controller and I attached to it VM drive, like a CD drive. And now I can install that generation 2 on that. And also, if you want, you can create what we call create another virtual hard disk for data, and you attach it to it. But it should be okay now to create that GUI because I have the path to it where it needs to be stored. I have the name, and I have the memory and all that stuff allocated to it. Let's see. So if I do select, let's see, select this one. Let me select all of them. See what happens. If I do that. One. Okay, so let's see. And voila, you see that the DNS, this is created automatically with the one. So let's see if I double click here, start. Let's see if they're gonna start and go right here. Inner. All right, see that? It takes like once you have that in your file, for example, all that you need to change basically the VM name, then you can install any VM right on the fly. So we install the first one. I'm going to let this one run. We install the DHCP server, which is this one here, and now it's going to prompt you to put the password. Password 01. We need to confirm password 01. Confirm that. And let's see. Now, while this is running, I need to go to DNS. Oh, it's running. Look how fast it gets in here. Okay, so this is cool. So that's the memory. If you want, you can enable the dynamic. You have to, let me see. Let's log in first. And this is the password here. 01. And this is like a standalone server. I'm going to take a second. While this is running, let me go to DNS. Okay, this one's going to ask you what you want to install, which version. So I'm going to go with the standard desktop. Next. Agree about this one here. You go next. Here, this is 40 gig. You go next. Okay, so I think we're out of time. I'm gonna let it run and catch up with them later on. I'll show you the final result on that tomorrow. Any question what we did so far? I mean, it's two ways you can install the VMs. We can automate it by doing the PowerShell like this, or you can do it through GUI. Doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm gonna stop right here if you don't have a question. And I'll see you in a little bit, about 9:25. Unless if you have a question. Anybody have a question?
No, sir.
Okay. I'll see you in a little bit.
Yes, sir.
See you.